Chapter 2. The Silver Lining. On July 13, 2009, Time magazine ran a piece on page 2 they called 10 Questions for Robert Kiyosaki. One of the questions asked of me was this: are there opportunities to create new companies in this turbulent economy? Are you kidding? Exclamation mark. Was my first thought. Here is how I answered. This is the best time. When times are bad is when the real entrepreneurs emerge. Entrepreneurs don't really care if the market's up or down. They're creating better products and better processes. So when somebody says, oh, there's less opportunity now, it's because they're losers. You've heard an awful lot of bad news about the economy. Ready for the good news? Actually, the bad news is the good news. I'll tell you the same thing I told Time magazine: a recession is the best time to start your own business. When the economy slows down, entrepreneurialism heats up like a stoked-up wood stove on the cold winter night. Q. What do the Microsoft and Disney empires have in common, besides the fact that they are both hugely successful billion-dollar businesses that have become household names? As they were both launched during a recession. In fact, more than half the corporations that make up the Dow Jones Industrial Average got their starts during a recession. Why? Simple. In times of economic uncertainty, people get creative. They break out of their comfort zones and take initiative to help make ends meet. It's a matter of good, old-fashioned American entrepreneurialism at its best. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. For one thing, the market for new opportunity is ripe during tough economic times. 5 years ago, when housing values were soaring and credit was available everywhere, nobody was hungry. People's bellies were full, they felt safe, and few were looking for any alternative means of income. Employees weren't worried about the financial stability of their employers or whether a pink slip might be in their future. But now that layoffs are rampant and everyone is worried about what the future holds, millions of people are soberly reevaluating their finances and realizing that if they want to have a secure future they can count on, they're going to have to come up with the plan B. People today are hungrier than ever to earn extra money, and because of that, they are more receptive and more inclined to open their minds to new avenues. In fact, this was true even before the recent economic meltdown. Ever since the 80s, and especially since the turn of the century, the drive to control our own economic futures has been building. Here's what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said in a 2007 report titled Work, Entrepreneurship and Opportunity in 21st Century. America. Millions of Americans are embracing entrepreneurship by running their own small businesses. Now, I'm no economist, but I know someone who is. Paul Zane Pilzer. Paul is a whiz kid, was Citibank's youngest ever vice president, and left their banking world to make millions going into business for himself. He's had a few New York Times bestsellers, predicted the savings and loan crisis before it happened, and served as an economic advisor in 2 presidential administrations. He's someone worth listening to. Paul talks about a 180-degree shift in cultural values around the nature of career paths, with the conventional corporate employee career structure giving way to the entrepreneurial path. The traditional wisdom in the second half of the 20th century, says Paul, was to go to school, get a good education, and go to work for a large company. The idea of going into business for yourself was most often regarded as risky. Admirable, perhaps, but risky, and maybe a little crazy. Today it's completely the other way around. Paul's right. That U.S. Chamber of Commerce report I mentioned also refers to a Gallup poll finding that 61% of Americans say they would prefer to be their own boss. Another poll, this one by the Fresno research firm Decipher, found that 72% of all adult Americans would rather work for themselves than for a job, and 67% think about quitting their jobs regularly or constantly. 72% of all adult Americans would rather work for themselves than for a job, and 67% think about quitting their jobs regularly or constantly. And it's not just about making a living, it's also about the quality of how we're living. People are waking up to the fact that they want more control over their lives. They want to be more connected to their families, be in charge of their own time, work from their homes, determine their own destinies. In that Decipher study, 84% of respondents said they would be more passionate about their work if they owned their own business. The no. One reason they gave for wanting to work for themselves: to be more passionate about my work life. What's happening is that the 20th century myth of job security, with its promise that the path to a long, happy, fulfilling life is to find a job working for someone else, is crumbling before our eyes. The employment mythology. Most of us are so brainwashed by our circumstances that we think of employment as normal. But far from being historically normal, the whole concept of being an employee is actually a fairly recent phenomenon. During the agrarian age, most people were entrepreneurs. Yes, they were farmers who worked the king's lands, but they were not the king's employees. They didn't receive a paycheck from the king. In fact, it was the other way around. The farmer paid the king a tax for the right to use his land. These farmers actually made their living as a small business entrepreneurs. They were butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers who passed on their trade through the family lineage in what have come down to us as common last names: Smith, for the village blacksmith; Baker, for bakery owners; farmer, because their family's business was farming; tailor, derived from the tailor's profession; and cooper, the old term for the barrel maker's trade. It was not until the industrial age that a new demand began growing, the demand for employees. In response, the government took over the task of mass education, adopting the Prussian system, which is what most Western school systems in the world are still modeled after today. Have you ever wondered where the idea of retirement at age 65 came from? I'll tell you where. Otto von Bismarck, the president of Prussia, in 1889. Actually, Bismarck's plan kicked in at age 70, not 65, but it hardly matters, promising their old folks a guaranteed pension after age 65 was not much of an economic risk for Bismarck's government. At the time, the life expectancy of the average Prussian was about 45. Today, so many are living well into their 80s and 90s that the same promise might well bankrupt the federal government within the next generation. When you research the philosophy behind Prussian education, you will find that the purpose was to produce soldiers and employees, people who would follow orders and do as they were told. The Prussian system is for mass-producing employees. In America in the 60s and 70s, companies like IBM made employment for life the gold standard of job security. But employment at IBM hit its peak in 1985. And the whole concept of the solid, reliable corporate career has been in decline ever since. As GM goes, so goes the nation. Here we are, half a century later, and things aren't going so well for GM. Does that mean America is doomed? No, but here's what is doomed: the myth of corporate security and the 40-year plan. Entrepreneurial fever. I'm not saying employment is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's only one way of generating income, and one that is extremely limited. What's happening right now is that people are waking up to this fact. These people, including you, are realizing that the only way they're going to have what they really want in life is by setting foot on the path of the entrepreneur. And by the way, I'm not the only one who sees this. You may or may not have heard of Muhammad Yunus, author of Banker to the Poor, but the Nobel Committee in Oslo, Norway, has heard of him. They gave him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for his concept of microcredit for third world entrepreneurs. All people are entrepreneurs, says Yunus, but many don't have the opportunity to find that out. He said that before the economy started tanking in 07 and 08, and in their wake of all the financial bad news, more and more people are actively seeking the opportunity to do exactly what Mr. Yunus is talking about. Entrepreneurial fever has been kicking into high gear, because when their economy slows down, entrepreneurial activity heats up. In fact, entrepreneurs flourish in downtimes. In times of uncertainty, we look for other ways to generate income. When we know we can't rely on employers, we begin to look to ourselves. We start thinking maybe it's time to break out of our comfort zones and get creative to help make ends meet. A U.S. Federal Reserve survey shows that the average household net worth for entrepreneurs is 5 times that of conventional employees. That means entrepreneurs are 5 times more likely to come out of this downturn unscathed and even stronger than before, because they've created their own strong economy. A recent survey found that most U.S. voters view entrepreneurship as the key to solving the current economic crisis. History has repeatedly demonstrated that new companies and entrepreneurship are the way to bolster a flagging economy, said their survey's executive director. No kidding. Entrepreneurial fever has been kicking into high gear, because when the economy slows down, entrepreneurial activity heats up. In fact, entrepreneurs flourish in down times. Maybe those most US voters who say they believe that will actually get off their duffs and do something about it. It's possible, though I'm not holding my breath. But right now, the flagging economy that I'm most interested in seeing bolstered by entrepreneurship is yours. These may be economic hard times for the majority, but for some entrepreneurs, the ones who are open-minded enough to understand what I'm going to explain in the next few chapters, these are times pregnant with economic potential. Not only is now the time to have your own business, but in fact there has never been a better time than right now, today. As I said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And if that's true, which it is, then that leaves just 2 questions. First, are you willing to be tough? And if your answer is yes, then question no. 2 is get going doing what? I can't answer that first question for you, but I know exactly how to answer the second one. Answering that question is what this book is all about.